Well, you've mentioned Thea. Can you introduce us to Thea?
Okay, Thea is in her 30s when you meet her, although she's in her 30s when you meet her in a court scene. But then we go back to her very early life. She's an adopted daughter, a second child, a very unwanted second child. You have to read the book to explain why they would adopt her when she's unwanted.
Yeah.
But so she lives a very distressed childhood with a brother who dies very young, and so that's the start of her life. She's a very beautiful woman. She has strange things about her. Her two eyes don't match. She has two different colored eyes. She's very tall, very proficient in languages, just a very sensitive person, but sort of wanting something from life, but not really knowing what she wants.
Now, when you first dreamt up Thea, did you know where her life was going to take her?
No. Normally my characters' lives take on their own impetus. For instance, the book I'm reading now, I was writing one of my characters and suddenly, pop, bam, there she was, loud as life. And it's taken like 30,000 words to get her to pop out like that. So a lot of that stuff the earlier stuff I might have to cut or rewrite to get this popping character. But Thea was quite a difficult character because she's so sad a lot of the time. So she's quite difficult to be with. I found her quite draining. So after a few days of writing her, I'd be quite relieved to put her aside for a bit, let her wallow and take Sanusha, one of the other characters, because the book's written from three perspectives. So I could write Sanusha, who's a much more upbeat, sort of independent, sassy kind of character, and who was much easier to be with.
It's interesting how you really do carry them for the entirety of the book until you put it down. Do you still feel like they're with you sometimes?
Sometimes I do, but I think what I try to do is when I finish the book, I leave them behind. It's interesting that there was a book that I wrote when I was about 20, and it was the first fiction book I'd written, which has never been published, called I Packed My Bag of Africa. And it's a story about choosing to be in South Africa or leaving South Africa. You know, that whole debate that was happening at that time when people were leaving in droves and also coming back in droves. And there's one character there that I still have with me now. He particularly, he committed suicide in the book, and he was a very, very strong character, and I think I identified very strongly with him. So funnily enough, he's still here.
That's very
although he never got published, ironically.
Well, I want to talk about Thea's character. She sounds very complicated. Now, how did you do the research for this character?
Well, the background, obviously I needed to know the background about the postnatal distress. I needed to know about the psychosis. So that was a lot of research. I went to Valkenburg. I interviewed 2 psychiatrists there. I went into Pollsmoor prison, interviewed people in Pollsmoor.
Did you get to speak to any of the prisoners?
No, you're not allowed to speak to prisoners, but you sort of smile at them as you go past. I mean, it's a bit awkward because you feel like you're going to a zoo because these people can't leave. It was kind of an awkward feeling. I went to Grooteskier and I walked. When you get to that part in the story, there's a part where Clay arrives to come and find Thea in Grooteskier, and I walked that whole route, and just this whole feeling of walking this route you would have walked. Going to go and find her. So I did a lot of that side of things. And then I speak French myself. She's a French speaker. She's a tour operator. I have done that in a former life. So I use some of my own experiences to inform her career, but certainly not necessarily to inform her personality. She's extremely promiscuous. She's until she meets her second husband. She's very just out of sorts, I think. She just doesn't really know where she belongs.
Now, how do you think people will identify with Thea? How do you think people will react to her?
I think people will hopefully like her because I think all of us have that sense of uncertainty about where we belong in the world. If we don't, we're very lucky. But I think she has this strong love of her brother, and I think if anyone has loved any family member, whether it be a brother or a sister or a cousin or a father, and loses someone like that, you can see how something like that would affect you in a fundamental way. She's also got a very likable best friend called Annie, who is the stalwart through the entire book, and she's this amazing friend. And if a friend like that will stick with her, there's got to be something likable about her. I think she's the sort of person that maybe the reader will want to protect, want to care for, because she's so vulnerable. which is partly why her second husband, falls for her, is because she is so vulnerable and so in need of protection.
Well, now introduce us to Clay. Clay is Thea's husband.
Yes, Clay's very much a South African male. He likes his swimming, he likes his cycling, he plays water polo. So his sport's very important to him. He's very career orientated, very much an entrepreneur. But in the other sense though, he's not so traditionally South African male, who aren't really regarded as being so romantic and sensitive, whereas he is, which is probably a good thing considering the wife he ends up with. And I think he chooses her partly because he's a nurturer. He's very much a nurturer and very, very good with children. And when he meets Thea the first time he sees her, he falls in love with her. So he hasn't even spoken to her yet, and he's already thought this is the one for me. So he's very likable from that perspective. I think women will, especially wow, I like this guy.
Ooh, Clay.
Yeah, he's wonderful. He's very good looking. Yeah. He's successful. Initially, he's not very rich, but he becomes not rich but well off through his own endeavors. So yeah, he's a very likable character.
Amazing. And the third perspective is Sanusha.
Yeah, Sanusha, you start with her at the age of about 5. Yeah. She's maths obsessed, so she's quite weird. She counts everything. Maybe she's a little bit obsessive in some ways, and I think she uses numbers as a way to give herself some sort of foundation stability, because she's certainly not getting it at home. She's got a weird natural father who's very promiscuous, who's very intelligent, not that interested in being dad, really. Then she ends up with a mother in a half Indian, half South African English family. She's got some nice grandparents, luckily, who look after her. But she's extremely clever, like way ahead of her age. She's also very good with mechanics. She likes fixing cars and motorbikes, and she's can't really decide whether she's bisexual or lesbian, or she doesn't really know, I don't think. She's just also a little bit all over the show, but very, very bright and very precocious.